And of course, we'll be bringing you live here at the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, given that we are covering this particular annual meeting. Now, for this second hour, we'll be focusing on the finance bill. The hearings have started with the Finance Committee leading that particular charge. None other than Molo Member of Parliament Kimani Kuria-led committee is currently meeting with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Institute of Public Finance, Institute of Certified Public Accounts of Kenya, that is ISPAC, and then finally Deloitte and Tosh, that is a company. Those are the 5 participants who will be coming before the Molo Member of Parliament Kimani Kuria-led committee to discuss some of the proposals that were fronted by the Exchequer, that is the Treasury, and in terms of some of the recommendations they have made. Now, to run down through some of those recommendations is that the Treasury proposed the removal of ordinary bread from the list of zero-rated supplies. Now, that means the product will attract a 16% VAT. Motor vehicle tax at the rate of 2.5% of the value of the motor vehicle. This will mean that vehicle owners will pay an annual tax depending on the value of their cars, meaning the deduction is set at a minimum of 5,000 and a maximum of 100,000. Now, my panelist joining me for this discussion is Anthony Njeru, the Head of Communication and Research at the UDA Party. Anthony, karibu sana.
Thank you for having me here.
And then finally we have Oscar Omondi, a political analyst. Oscar, karibu sana. Okay. I can see you're focusing. Then let's start with you. I can see you're looking at some of your notes. So given that you're here, what do you make of the Treasury proposals in this finance bill?
I mean, thank you very much again, Abdi, for having me here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is Finance Bill 2024, and it's about a tax regime and where the government wants to get money for taxation. Mm-hmm. Personally, I really don't have a problem with taxation, right? Because government gets its money from taxation to do government services, to public service delivery. For some public service delivery to be done, there must be some form of a tax regime. My only problem with issues here are not revenue collection. Your tax regime is about revenue collection. I have no problem with revenue collection. My issue will be with revenue expenditure. Okay. Yes, mostly is revenue expenditure. When government, like for example, issue of taxing bread, where, you know, when the opposition has been there talking about like to a chini bread for our kids, I think a bit that discussion is a bit sensational and a bit whipping of emotions. For me, I don't have a problem with it when bread is taxed. My problem is, where do you want to use the money? Because if you tax bread to go and create jobs for the young people, I mean, that is okay. I mean, if you want to tax bread and want to use the money to build 5 level 5 hospitals, 47 level 5 hospitals in our counties, what is wrong with that? So the issue is about revenue expenditure, not revenue collection, in my way of thinking at it. But the problem is the discussion normally is when politicians pick the discussion, and now, again, how policies are made. It's not like long time the way policies were made. You know, parliamentarians are not specifically experts. For example, Oscar is a political scientist. That is my discipline. I'm not an expert in taxation. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in economy, but I've studied political economy. So I might be able to discuss the general impacts of this particular regime, but I might not be able to discuss the micro and macro implication of certain things. We need to understand the justification of why Treasury decided to do some of these, make some of these recommendations. But when you just give it to Parliament, then politicians pick it, then people start whipping emotions because everybody wants to earn a vote extra here and there. Then we lost the discussion because we don't really involve experts in the process. Long time ago, it was experts sitting, coming up with ideas. When it's given to Parliament, Parliament didn't have so much robust role in it. Although we have the idea of public participation, which we still don't have a very good structured way of managing public participation. We really don't know what is the threshold of public participation. For example, if a bill goes out there to be discussed at the public arena, how many people are supposed to be reached? Who are the actual stakeholders of a particular bill? Did we manage to carry whatever the constituents, for example, people in Tana River and people in Mandera said about this particular thing? And if that is the case, then 7 days of discussion of this cannot be enough time for us to discuss the public participation. So for me, the regime of public participation, it's not been well structured, not just at the national level, even at the county levels. A lot of policies are not very consultative because we don't have very good documented article on management of public participation exercise. So whatever Kimani Kuria is doing might not yield so much simply because there's no threshold. Even him is just going to ask questions. Then what do you do with these questions? If those people say no, do we have a system where a bill cannot be enacted into law simply because stuff that came from the public participation exercise were not adhered to? You know, whatever goes to court, the courts have tried, the judicial system have tried to measure what actually is a threshold of public participation. Yeah. But still, it needs to be in our jurisdictions, it needs to be in our laws, so that we are aware that to this level, public participation should be conducted like this. We have probably a book of what rules and regulations guide public participation, how they should be conducted, the nature of how it should be conducted, the experts of who are supposed to be part of public participation. For example, whatever Kimani Kuria is doing, Treasury is not involved.
It will be involved. It will come before the committee.
It will come before the committee, but there's no single debate of where these people are justifying why they are the people who initiated these particular bills. You know, they should be able to be given some arena so that they justify, so that I, as Oscar sitting here, can say, no, okay, now I can see where you're coming from. Because when you brought up, see, for example, I will tell you, when President William Ruto said that by the time he leaves office, not by the time he leaves office, but the end of his first term, he wants to raise the tax bracket, the taxation to 25%. You know, when you listen to that, it is just sensational. You don't know the justification of what he's talking about. Probably, he says that we want to bring many people. I think many people should be brought to the tax bracket because there are many people who are earning, who are doing business and are not a part of the tax bracket. And sometimes we put a lot of weight on other people because whatever he was struggling with, for example, when he was coming up with the housing levy, the court said that, you know, you cannot really tax only the people who are employed because there are other people who are doing business, who are doing even better, and they were not targeted. So we need to get a system where many people are brought into tax bracket and probably reduce tax.
Okay.
You give me right.
Anthony, as you respond to what Omondi is talking about, your thoughts, your initial thoughts when you saw that Finance Bill 2024 when it was gazetted, of concern not just to you, given that you come from the ruling coalition itself, what was the bone of contention inside that Finance Bill?
Well, I think the major bone of contention was what you have just mentioned, the withdrawal of the zero rating of the bread, and of course the 2.5% for for the motor vehicles, and also the banking increment of taxation. But Hashim, I'd really like to take you guys back to our manifesto and the plans and the things that we promised our Kenyans when we were doing our campaigns out there. If you look at the implementation framework of the Kenya Kwanza government, it's based on 6 objectives, which include reduction of cost of living, expanding the tax base, which is one of the issues that is being wholesomely discussed in public spheres. Of course, improving the foreign exchange balance, inclusive growth, and what else? And also creating opportunities for people out there. And if you look at our way of increasing the tax base, it is majorly guided by some of the policy documents that drive our economy, such as the medium-term plan 4, which is a 3-year plan in the lead up to the Wholesome Vision 2030, and also the tax policy, which was subject to public participation sometime last year. And if you look at all these policy documents, if you look at the medium-term plan 4 policy document, we have a target of increasing our tax to GDP ratio to at least 20% by 2027. Currently, we are at 14.1%, which is one of the lowest in Africa compared to countries like Cote d'Ivoire, the likes of South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya has the 3rd largest GDP in Africa. And going to that, if you look at the finance bill of 2023, which was last year, it was more centered on direct taxes, which really touched on employees and employers. But if you look at deeply at this year's finance bill, 2024-2025, it is more centered on indirect taxes, which more so touch on the consumer. And the issue which is of the public discourse that is currently ongoing is at what measure will this have, or what ripple effect will it really have? Does increasing consumer taxes really, do you really achieve what you are really trying to get? Because if you look at the withdrawal of the zero rate on bread, yes, we shall collect that tax, but in the long term, we might see a reduction in the demand. And that is why the finance bill was subject to public participation, so that we can have extensive discussions about such issues. If you look at our revenue collection currently, 40% is from the pay as you earn, which means that the main target is employees in the formal sector. And if you look at the finance bill of 2024-2025, is trying to address that by also, like what my brother Oscar has said, how can we include other people within the tax band? And if you look at one of the tax proposals in the Finance Act, one of them is to ensure that anyone who transacts business with government is liable to a certain deduction, even as they conduct business with government. And as we speak right now, there's that African Development Bank conference that is in KICC. Yes, and for a very long time we've been talking about how we can sustain our debt and how can we do that. One of the most crucial things that needs to be implemented is by increasing our tax base so that we can reduce on the reduction. And my brother Oscar has also mentioned a very important topic of discussion as well. The issue is not collection of taxes.
It is expenditure.
It is expenditure. We have to look at how we are using that tax. Without tax, we cannot fund public expenditure, we cannot fund infrastructure. And most importantly, we also have to look at what the government is trying to address in terms of ensuring that we spend prudently. There's no wastage in government. And I would like to refer back to some of the austerity measures that the president mentioned a few months back. And part of it is cutting recurrent expenditure by 30%, reduction of domestic and international travel by half, and also cutting on unnecessary expenditure on public offices that more so go to things like coffee, tea, and snacks that can be controlled at that level. Yes.
Because Oscar, you only have 2 minutes. Kindly so we need to take our viewers back to KICC as you rebuttal. We have been in this particular scenario just in the finance bill of 2023. It was hotly debated and contested, but at the end of the day, it passed. What needs to be done differently this time around in just 2 minutes?
Yeah, what needs to be done is to get to address the core issues of things. Like, for example, what I've told you, it's about revenue expenditure. We have corruption, we have mismanagement of government resources, we have wastages, and one of the biggest things is the runaway wage bill that we're dealing with. The wage bill is too huge. You know, when the government of 2013, when they decided to retain the public administration and put in again the county governments, there's services that are supposed to be done. For example, if you go to the counties, the registrar of lands dealing with lands issues, and then there's minister of CEC dealing with lands again. So there's multiplication of duties. That is what makes our wage bill to grow, and it's not manageable at this particular time. So the most important thing to be addressed in other forums is that revenue expenditure. Tax, it forces government now, because even our loans, the domestic loan is also growing very well, and it's becoming very expensive. By the time that the regime goes out of government, domestic loan was around 16%, but now it's around 25%. That makes the domestic loan very, very expensive even for government. So I think what should be done differently is that get the people involved, get a lot of stakeholders input into this one. We don't have to have a situation where when government says something, then it goes with it. You know, like, for example, the house levy, you know, the back and forth from the courts and what have you. I think they were not really addressed. For example, now what Kimani Kuria is doing with other people in parliament, I mean, the outcry over that, those are experts. The law and touch have very good people who have economic knowledge. I mean, the ISPAC, these are people, these are accountants who are there and have a good idea about some of these things. So their input is very, very important to be put in place so that we're able to deal with something that we're going to help everybody else in the long run. Yeah, that's my take.
Okay, and we can confirm to you that the Institute of Certified Public Accounts, that is ISPAC, is already before the Finance Committee. Our reporter Giverson Mine is on the ground. Once we do get those live links in the public hearing of the Finance Bill 2024, we'll be bringing you. But before that, I need to take you back to the Kenyatta International Convention Center. Day 2 of the AFDB 2024 59th annual meeting that is currently happening there. We expect that this morning and in the afternoon, the governor's dialogue at the amphitheater. Remember, tomorrow will be the largest day, with the opening ceremony will be held at Savo Hall and followed by a high-level presidential dialogue. I want to take you there now live, where FDB will be celebrating 60 years. Now, the panel of the international financial institutions will also be held. You have just heard from our reporters who are on the ground, from Nduta Mukami and O'Brien Kimani. Let's go there live once more and listen into the proceedings that are happening there. Good morning, O'Brien. I can see you back. O'Brien, who...
Hashim,
okay.
Abdiaziz. It's true. It's day 2 of the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. And today is just a quiet day here in this room. There isn't much that is happening inside the Savo ballroom, but tomorrow this is going to be the center. It's going to be the nerve center of this meeting. Today, so many other meetings are happening in other places, from you know, the amphitheater to Lenana Hall. But today here is a bit quiet. It's being prepared. It's being prepped for tomorrow. This is where all the action will be taking place. But of course, we'll continue to give you more update on what's happening here, and of course, tracking the conversations that are taking place in this place. We just now want to focus our attention on a subject that is growing very fast, and a trade that is becoming or that is gaining more traction on the African continent. And we are talking about the carbon trading. According to McKinsey estimates, the carbon trading in Africa is estimated to be valued at about $600 million US. Now, They say that this is actually a drop in the ocean. Africa can actually trade more when it comes to carbon trading. And guess who is joining me on the set? I'm joined by Evans Kayo. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Vast Carbon. He's one of the pioneers of carbon trading in Africa, in Kenya. And so he's going to guide us through this concept and where Kenya lies and where is the nexus, or where is the nexus between carbon trading and these annual meetings. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Evans. First of all, help us understand. There has been a lot of conversation on climate financing here. Yesterday, one of the forum, the speakers were saying that when you look at Africa's need when it comes to climate financing, is about $277 billion US, but what we are getting is about $30 billion US. And so there was a push to try and encourage more African countries to exploit carbon trading. First of all, help us understand, what is carbon trading?
Thank you very much, O'Brien, for having me on your show. So carbon trading is basically a mechanism for bringing in new forms of financing into climate action. Formed during the Kyoto Protocol back in 1997. It became active about 8 years later, about in 2005, after a number of piloting exercises. And essentially what this does is that it moves financing from those people who are polluting to activities in various places around the world that are contributing towards tackling climate change. And they're contributing towards not only tackling climate change in general, but specifically tackling climate change through emission reductions and emission avoidance projects. What I mean by that is, if you are in Kenya, and you spoke to me a few minutes before you went live on air, that there are farms that you can put together to have trees there and have those trees do some sequestration potential, or have some sequestration potential. We can leverage that sequestration potential by calculating how much emission reductions you've had during the course of the year. And those emission reductions can be translated to carbon credits, which is basically just a representation of 1 ton of emission reductions, or 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, that can be sold to companies that are polluting abroad, and they can transfer that financing down to us in Africa to engage in that much needed climate action. So essentially it's just a mechanism to move financing from developed nations to developing nations to enable climate action to take place in an efficient manner. And that actually contributes to us filling in the financing gap that we have in the sector that you heard about yesterday. Yes.
What you're discussing here, or what you're identifying here is what we are calling the polluter pay principle. But critics of these concept, they are saying that this is akin to the West or the developed countries paying developing countries for their bad manners when it comes to climate change. Do you agree with them?
To the extent to which financing really needs to flow to the continent, I agree that the polluter has to contribute towards financing projects that lead towards mitigating the actions that they've caused. I do believe that it is important for us, if we are to participate meaningfully in climate action, we need to have that kind of support. We need to have that kind of financing coming in to help us build these projects that contribute directly towards emission reductions and emission avoidance. And these projects, or rather this climate action that Africa needs to take part in, has to be financed some way. We cannot finance that out of our own GDP. We cannot finance it out of our own revenue generation mechanisms. There has to be a creative way through which that comes in. And one of the lowest hanging fruits is basically that particular polluter who has the capability to actually provide that financing and have it brought back to the continent for us to take meaningful action in climate action. Now, people would say that is actually contributing towards what you've just called bad manners. But we can also look at it from the lens of it being a deterrent, because I can't think of many organizations that will want to have more expenditure on their balance sheets or on their income statements as being expenditures towards going to purchase carbon credits for their mitigation actions. So it is a deterrent in such that from time to time you realize that there are organizations that will want to reduce the amount of expenditure that goes towards buying carbon credits, and they might look at sustainable means of ensuring that emission reduction is achieved by cleaning out the entire value chain, or making sure that the entire value chain is carbon neutral. Yes.
And you see, the conversations around carbon credits, is gaining traction. And here in Kenya, we have actually, the government has actually published the regulations around carbon trading. How big is this business, and have we even scratched the surface?
O'Brien, I'm glad that you mentioned that you laid the context very clearly when we started. That at the moment, we're only looking at about $600 million worth of carbon credits traded only in the voluntary carbon markets, not including the compliance carbon markets, and also not including Article 6 carbon markets. So that value is estimated to grow to about $6 billion by 2030 annually. Okay, and that is only on the voluntary carbon markets. Including the others, you can already see the scale to which we are going to achieve some significant economic benefit. Now, with this economic benefit comes some other benefits that touch on several United Nations SDGs. For example, with projects that are involved in renewable energy, we estimate that we'll be able to have jobs. And if I can just put a number to it, for example, solar projects can give 1.5 times more jobs than their fossil fuel counterparts. Ecosystem restoration projects can give up to 3.7 times more jobs than their fossil fuel counterparts as well. In terms of health, for example, we have currently about 700,000 people die from indoor pollution every year, and that can be significantly reduced through clean cooking projects, which are part of these carbon projects as well. And again, there are also other very many UN SDGs that carbon credits can touch upon, that can range up to even ecosystem restoration, which is extremely important for us building our climate resilience as a continent.
Yeah. And that's why, we're having companies like your company, Vast Technology. I mean, you've been in existence for 2 years, and we are likely to see many more companies, joining this space just to ensure that this sector is exploited and exploited responsibly. Very good. Kayo, in the interest of time, I mean, we have to wind up, but we'll definitely continue to have more of these conversations so that we ensure that the conversation around carbon credit is elevated, and of course the people get to understand what is this. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, we continue to give you this and more when it comes to the coverage of AFDB. We are here at KICC. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Asante sana. And of course, Evans Kayo is the CEO or the Chief Operating Officer at Vast Carbon. Asante sana. Back to you, Hashim.
Thank you so much. That is O'Brien Kimani just carrying out conversation when it comes to the effects of climate change and, of course, this new era that we need to exploit when it comes to carbon trading, where the administration has been talking about it back off from the African Climate Summit of 2023 that was held here in Nairobi. Our conversation still focuses on the finance bill. As I told you, our reporter Giverson Minor is already on ground, and we can confidently tell you that some of the proposals and recommendations that ISPAC is making before the Finance Committee led by Kure Kimani on the proposed motor vehicle tax by the Exchequer is that the motor vehicle industry is already taxed through other forms of taxes, including vehicle import taxes, which are almost 50% of the value of the car, taxes on petroleum products, including levies such as the maintenance levy, petroleum, development levy, petroleum, the regulatory levy, railway development levy, among others, and that the tax will negatively impact the insurance penetration, which is already very low in Kenya. This will negative ripple effects to the facets of the economy. Now, imposing this tax on public service vehicles is likely to lead to increased costs to Mwananchi, as the owners of the motor vehicles are likely to pass the burden to the common man. And of course, these are just proposals. If you have an inquiry or you need to change some of the recommendations that were made by Treasury, you can appear before that committee that is currently gathering memorandums, both through email or even written. Currently, we can tell you they have 380 written memorandum. Now, let me toss this conversation back to Anthony. Anthony, we had this conversation, as I asked Oscar, last year in the Finance Bill 2023, which was hotly debated and contested. Right now, we have a similar scenario. These are just proposals. So what should be done differently? And the views of this, not just the from ISPAC and these other stakeholders within the sector be included, but the common man.
Thank you for that question. And one thing that I really want to mention is with the growing economy, it calls for an increase in tax collection because fiscal adjustments and economic growth are not incompatible. And if I would quote the president, for us to have progress and growth, tough decisions have to be made. And just like I mentioned earlier, most of these taxes, they are subject to public participation, just like you mentioned earlier. And particularly if you look at the 2.5% on motor vehicles, of course, there is the debate about the other taxes that are being charged on that juncture, including the import taxes, the maintenance levy, the fuel levy, and all that. And probably the perception is if you're able to afford your own personal vehicle, maybe the perception is you would be in a position to afford this other new tax. But we also have to look at what kind of ripple effect it will have on society. Because if you tax the PSVs, it means that there will be an increase in fares. And so, just like I said, it is subject to public participation, and some of the views that will be gathered from such forums will be able to give us a way forward on how we can adjust if need be. Yes.
And Oscar, as a response to that as well, we do anticipate political lines to be drawn. This is a political process at the end of the day. We have witnessed that the Azimio allied MPs clearly stating they will reject the bill in its entirety or some of the areas that they believe are contentious. So do we expect political lines to be drawn, and does Azimio have the number to topple this bill, given that when it comes to the majority and minority discussions play out?
You know, since the Kenya Kwanza government came into power, they've had what Mutai Nguni called one time, what did he say? What did he call it? The tyranny of numbers in Parliament. And that one has survived, but we are in midterm. And midterm, one of the biggest debates that is going on is the differences in UDA, the difference between Honorable Gachagua and the sitting president. I mean, one of the threats that they made is that they will shoot down. The MPs allied to the deputy president made a threat that they will shoot down the Finance Bill 2024. It's not about Azimio. It is about whatever will happen between the wrangles within UDA. That might tilt the voting patterns in Parliament for the first time. If he makes good these threats, which I don't think so, but if they make good their threat, because the Azimio side lacks around how many? Around 30 or 40 MPs to be able to get to past half. Because, you know, when we constituted Parliament, there were independents. And then there was UDM with around 14 MPs. So UDM decided to move to vote with the government. And then independents also decided to vote with the... So at midterm, things normally change. I mean, our politics, midterm now, the lines are normally drawn. In the US, you know, there are elections at the beginning of the term, then the midterm elections. At midterm, always changes happen, and sometimes you find the speaker or Congress is lost to Republicans when Democrats have had the Congress until midterm. So we are going to the midterm, and the lines are getting drawn. It doesn't matter what Azimio says, that they're going to shoot the bill. They've tried shooting bills in Parliament, and they've never succeeded. But if the Gachagua wing of the coalition within UDA makes good their threat, and they move not to vote with the government, then we will have robust discussion in Parliament, because now MPs will start voting not along party lines. You know, the problem we've had, Abdi, is that people who sit in Parliament, the leadership of Parliament is not within Parliament. The president, who is the leader of the UDA party, sits out of Parliament. Raila Odinga and the leadership of Azimio sit out of parliament. So most of the time, Opiyo Wandayi, who is the majority leader, has to take instructions out of parliament. So the discussion or whatever is in his head is out of parliament. Same to Kimani Ichung'wah, who is the leader of majority. He takes instructions out of parliament. The discussion is never inside parliament. In case a tilt happens, then the discussion will get back now to parliament, and parliament will be sitting down and discussing very good, robust policies will be coming out of this house, because they will be out of very robust discussion. But when people come to vote because they've gone to State House or they've gone to Azimio Center to come up and wholesomely reject, wholesomely, you see, at that particular, but I know what has happened also. There are some of the Azimio MPs, like for example, I think from ODM, I think 7 or 5 MPs have been voting with government. So there will be those trade-offs. And the problem with such political party trade-offs, policy is taken away from experts. So whatever experts discuss outside there, whatever we are discussing with Deloitte, whatever we are discussing with ISPAC, whatever, it gets consumed in the deliberations in parliament.
Let me allow Anthony to respond to that. We have heard from the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, numerously during the weekend. He has been in Eldoret. Uasin Gishu has confirmed that he is working with the President. Is there wrangles, given that you're inside UDA?
Well, whatever is happening on the public spheres is the UDA guys showing that there is democracy within the party. And just like the Deputy President assured Kenyans out there, he is actually working with the President. They are working in tandem. And what the Deputy President is trying to do, of course, he is the senior most leader after the President in the country. And what he's trying to say is, guys, we need to come up together. We need to have our thoughts together. We need to move in one direction. But it's nothing away from any kind of political wrangles. And something which I also want to mention, and it's in regards to UDA politics and also the finance bill. We need to deviate from politicizing this finance bill process, because UDA and the government generally is a listening government, and ideally that's the reason why these policies are put out there in public, so that we can gather thoughts from diverse people, and also for the investors that we have in the country to put in their inputs. What do you think about this policy? How can we build it to be a better thing that will propel our country to the next level? And still coming back to our political party, I'd say UDA party is a very democratic party. We are also listening to people at the grassroots level. That is why we are carrying out our grassroots elections, which have so far been very much successful. And whatever is going on in UDA is very much, it is not something which is out of the blues. It is something which is also happening. Whatever is happening in Mount Kenya is also happening in Western with the Tawe movement. It is also happening in the coast. So all these are politics. I want to assure Kenyans out there that UDA party is very intact, and we are moving in the same direction, and we have fixated on ensuring that we implement fully the 172 promises that we promised in our manifesto.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much. And apologies, Oscar. We need to get out of studio before they throw us out. That is, of course, figuratively. Anthony Njeru, the head of communication and research from the UDA party, thank you for joining us. And Oscar Modi, political analyst. We need to shelve this conversation, unfortunately, for another day. This is a conversation that is happening, and we witness it every weekend. And of course, this is something we can converse about in the coming days. So thank you so much. That has been our show this morning and in the afternoon, and we'll be continue focusing at the KICC and other stories making headlines at this hour, especially when it comes to the public hearing that is currently ongoing with the Finance Committee leading that particular charge. As I told you, ISPAC is currently before the committee and making various recommendations, and the committee is set to consider some of those recommendations before